You've been devastated by the relationship, and the world just thinks it's a normal relationship breaking up because they think so well of this person. In fact, they may even look sideways at you. So you feel as though you've entered the twilight zone, and above all else, it feels unfair and unjust. So I got an email from someone who subscribes to this channel. It was a little while ago. Who was raised by narcissistic parents and shared that she was always part of a system where nobody else sees the parent's behavior. And while she trusts what she sees, she wanted to find out if she was the only one in this situation where nobody else was seeing. Well, I hope whoever you are who submitted this question, I hope you're watching because this is for you, because my guess is she's not alone. Have you ever felt that way? Whether it is your parents, a spouse or partner, a sibling, a boss, a friend, that you see it, you really see it, and have gotten past the self-gaslighting and you don't question it. Like you're very clear on the unhealthy patterns and it's real. And yet, nobody else seems to get it, almost unanimously. The people around you either don't see a problem with this person or with these people, or may even think that these narcissistic people in your life, they're just great, or they make excuses when their bad behavior shows up. In the old story, which many of you heard as children, of the emperor's new clothes, the vain emperor, who apparently loved to do fashion parades for the people in his land, then gets scammed by a sort of old-fashioned grifter stylist who takes his money and tells him, "Darling, you look fabulous," while the emperor stands there naked. The emperor then walks down the street buck naked, and everyone oohs and ahs over him. Oh, emperor, what a grand outfit. What grand robes. And the only one who calls him out is a little boy, truth teller, truth seer, who says, "Whoa, the emperor is naked." Listen, it is lonely to be the one who sees it when others don't. Now, why would this happen? There's a few reasons. Number one, because you're dealing with a communal narcissistic person or people. People with these communal narcissistic vibes, they do lots of stuff for other people. And as long as everyone is praising them, and the narcissistic people get to do the things for the other people on the schedule that works for the narcissist and get to do the things they want to do, well then, they can really, really seem generous. And everyone just goes along. And you may even seem like a jerk for being suspicious or being turned off by the communal narcissist. Okay, so that's one version of why people don't see it and you do. Number two, it could be that you're dealing with a grandiose narcissism, that the other people don't see sort of the dark side of that as much. A grandiose narcissistic person in smaller doses can actually be kind of fun and charming. And others may see this grandiose narcissist as the life of the party, as fun, as generous, extroverted, charming, attentive, curious, compelling. The more time that you spend with a grandiose narcissist, the more you see their vulnerable side, the manipulations, the entitlement, the low empathy, the anger, the selfishness. But a little bit of a grandiose narcissist can kind of feel like a theme park. I mean, nobody wants to live in a theme park, but it is a bit of escapism once in a while and now and then. Number three, the narcissistic person, the number three reason that people don't always see it when you do, is because the narcissistic person holds a lot of power, control, or maybe even stirs fear in the other people around you. In the story of the emperor, it seems that the people in the emperor's land were in some kind of old-fashioned cult. You had to praise the leader unquestioningly, or else maybe you were going to get in trouble. In some family systems, we can witness a similar dynamic. If you were to critique, for example, the narcissistic person in charge, you will get in trouble. And that fear can result in an almost collective fawn response. And just like we witness in cultic systems, the willingness to throw other people under the bus, and that may mean that these other people in the system will literally go to the head of that system, whomever it is, to tell them a rule that you broke or something you did, or will just maintain the stance that this tyrannical person is great and has everyone's interests at heart. And if you have any problem with that, with them, then that's something that's wrong with you. The number 4 reason, but no one else seems to see it, but you do, are the good old enablers. And that overlaps with these other 3 reasons I've listed too. But the enablers can be why it seems like other people don't get it. The enablers are invested in the status quo, how they benefit from the system. The enablers may be a little narcissistic themselves, and especially in family systems. They may be the ones who are more concerned with how the group is viewed by the world, or how the group functions, or the collective, than they are with the health and well-being of the individual people within that system. Enablers do tend to stick by the person who allows their lives to carry on the way the enablers want their lives to carry on, which is usually with this little change and muss and hassle and keeping things as they have always been. A number 5 reason why other people often don't see this is people don't get this. Studying how narcissistic relationships affect people is my life. So for me, it's a whole I see dead people thing that's happening for me. But many people don't. It's not what most people study. There's not a day that goes by when I meet someone who does not get it. Now, I'd like to think that to greater or lesser degree, all of you watching this video, watching this channel, get it or want to get it or have been through it and are willing to see it for what it is. But there was a time when you didn't get it. There was a time when I didn't get it. Honestly, in fact, even when I was in graduate school and in my clinical rotations after graduate school, that was when I first started to get it. But the professors and a lot of the training doctors around me actually didn't want to engage the discussion. Despite all of their knowledge, back in the 1990s, people didn't really get this. And so when other people don't get it, they don't see it, they can't see it. But that takes us to another issue, and that is number 6. People don't want to get this. It sucks to get this. It can feel like a loss of hope and a loss of innocence, and even in a sense that the world kind of sucks. Radical acceptance, it won't change, not everyone can change enough to make a difference. That doesn't feel very nice. The idea that some folks just couldn't be healthy parents or healthy spouses or healthy partners or healthy siblings or healthy friends. And forgiveness isn't really going to fix it. To really get this is an acknowledgement that even the safest corners of our worlds are a little more dangerous than we think. Who wants to get that? I have even survivors who get through it and then want to put it all behind them. You can't put this behind you. Healing over time means that you integrate this knowing. It does mean that the fear lifts. It does mean that you stop calling your wisdom cynicism, because it's not cynicism. It's seeing things clearly so you can be more discerning and you stop blaming yourself. And sadly, that is not the stance that most people take. So yeah, in some families, in some workplaces, friend groups, other social or organized groups like a church or a local community organization or a local political group. I don't know, even something like the local parent-teacher group. Yes, you in fact may be the one person who sees it. People don't like change. We are homeostatic creatures. We like it to be steady. We human beings, I think all mammals are like that. And steady is, again, something that people like. Not all, but most. And to see narcissism in your midst means that you are questioning power, obedience, obligation, duty. Concepts like love your parents no matter what. Stoic, self-harming philosophies like suck it up, stiff upper lip, let it go, move on, etc. You can move on, but you can only move on if you can understand and integrate what happened to you. When we are the only person who sees something, no one else around us seems to get it, we doubt ourselves. And being through a narcissistic relationship means we already doubt ourselves. It is courageous to honor what you know. And it's courageous to honor that you know what you're seeing, even when others around you don't. That's why those of you in that truth seer or truth teller role are often inherently courageous people, even though it's very uncomfortable. So what do? We have to recognize that the not seers are limited people. And we may need to be cautious and not try to convince them or to keep explaining ourselves to them or wasting our energy. We also have to ensure that maybe we don't engage with these people at times when we are having a crisis of faith or just feeling run down or vulnerable. It's important to cultivate other supports that see it and know that these other people who don't see it can be what can magnify the harms of the narcissistic relationship for you. Maya Angelou said it first, and she said it best. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And that applies to the people who don't see it as well. So we can do a bit of a riff on Dr. Angelou's words and try it this way. When people don't see it, don't try to convince them. There are lots of different people in the world who do not get, or honestly do not want to get narcissism. So on this list of people, I would include, first, people who simply just don't know about it, lucky them, or maybe not lucky them. Second, people who are enablers and prefer to retain their Pollyanna worldview and not have to consider that there are people out there with tough and unkind personalities. Number 3, people who have not yet been affected by narcissism. And yes, there are folks out there who have not. Number 4, people who have these traits and qualities. Maybe they're not even fully narcissistic, but they're in the neighborhood. Number 5, believe it or not, even therapists who are so wedded to the idea that anything could be changed and fixed through therapy and really are not open to the idea that some personality styles and subsequently behaviors will never change. And number 7, people who have enough power and privilege that they are typically protected from a lot of the fallout of narcissism until they get screwed, and then they expect the whole world to listen to their unique experience. Or people who have enough power, privilege, or money that they have the means to solve their problem without the ruin and the heartbreak that all of us normal folks endure. It's this last group, these privileged folks, that we often forget about. The other groups, the enablers, you know about, because you yourself personally may be having to deal with them. You may be surprised by the therapist/coach/helping profession one, but maybe not if you did have a therapist who didn't get it. And obviously, we don't expect the narcissistic folks to look in the mirror. But interestingly, the narcissistic people will lose their minds if they believe that they're in a relationship with someone who invalidates or gaslights them. But this group is an interesting one, this power, privilege, money people. They often don't get it. Now, most of us don't know lots of people like this, but even if you know a few, it's interesting to even think about this. And there's a few reasons for why they don't get it. First, narcissistic people, as a rule, sidle up to people with power, wealth, influence, and status. So while the rest of us endure the rudeness, dismissiveness, gaslighting, devaluation, and all of the other shades of ick that narcissistic people show to us, narcissistic folks will almost never show it to someone who is rich or powerful or famous or high status. Narcissistic people may swoon and try to win over these folks. They may pull out the charm and charisma and be sort of unctuous and almost bootlicky with powerful people. You may be shocked at how the person who was so awful to you behind closed doors or in private becomes as gentle and yielding as a kitten and almost self-humiliating in the face of this powerful person. Second, this group of privileged people is largely cordoned off from the stress, the day-to-day stress all of us have to deal with. These folks have handlers to deal with the difficult people in their lives, their assistants, their cleaners, their staff. They all have the unfortunate job of having to maybe deal with any difficult folks that come up in the running of their homes or businesses. So the people of power, money, and privilege often sort of glide along, not having to deal with the difficulties of difficult folks. They don't have to wait in lines. They don't have to work through phone trees or customer service or press 1, press 2, press this, or mean bosses, or even have difficult conversations. Third, these privileged, moneyed, well-protected folks, from a probability standpoint, are a little more likely to be narcissistic or narcissism adjacent than your average bear. And there are lots of reasons for this. But then you have the version of them not getting it because they are it. Now, not all people in these positions are, but again, they are just, if compared to the average population, a little bit more likely to be this sort of personality. The ones who got themselves by sheer brute force to the top of this hierarchy, again, on their own, well, needless to say, that is very hard to do if you aren't narcissistic. And the ones who inherited it, or somehow it came very easily or through a really big swath of luck, there's a real risk that they were raised with values such as entitlement and may not always be narcissistic, but may not always know how to treat other people, especially people who are not like them, or have any empathy for what real life is like for regular people. And finally, what happens when privileged, powerful, moneyed people do encounter someone narcissistic? Listen, although I do try to avoid it when possible, every so often, it's pretty rare, but every so often, I find myself, often for sometimes work reasons or other reasons, to have to interact with people from these highest of high echelons where the privilege is so high that the air feels thin. And it's when you're in their spaces, you recognize they do not have stress the way the rest of us do. So already everything about their lives on the surface is quite different. But one thing that struck me is how the folks I had met with in this space, many of them clearly understood what narcissism was, and in their groups, there were some people going through difficult narcissistic situations, divorces from narcissistic people, some had narcissistic parents, a few had business dealings with narcissistic people, so they did get it. But it got very interesting when the conversation turned to people who were clearly narcissistic, sometimes even, well known to other people, public eye people, and that these privileged, well-off people were friends with or they knew. And that these people, these narcissistic people they knew through their power or whatever, were hurting lots of people with their words and actions. And I got to tell you, the privileged people could not see it. And that's when I saw that people who live behind the gates and the walls and the layers and layers of protection, they can get it when it affects them or someone just like them. But they really can't get their head around how narcissistic behavior hurts lots of other people. I do think that people often who hold this much privilege and protection and power are so bubble wrapped that they have cognitive or intellectual empathy, or empathy for people like them or in their direct circle, but sadly have been so isolated from the real human experience that they can't really mount up empathy for the problems of regular people who don't have the resources to just make those problems from these narcissistic relationships go away. Or may think, just get over it and stop being so sad and powerless. Listen, not all of us know people like this, but in your own lives, maybe even in your workplace, the person who runs the place you work or something, you may know folks who have a lot of power and pull. And you may see that they are often the ones who might have been the least empathic to your circumstance and just expected you to figure it out or not make that big a deal out of it. Or my favorite, and I say that ironically, favorite thing that many sort of privileged types will do, they will either hand you some sort of magical thinking, spiritual bypassing, toxic positivity self-help book, like Think Your Way into Love, or Breathe the Toxic Away, or Lessons About Love from a healer non-monk priest who lives on a mountaintop and has never been in a relationship, or tell you about some amazing healer they have and give you their number, leaving out the part that this magical healer charges $5,000 a pop. Because when you got power, it's nothing that a phone call and a magic spell can't solve. And the big problem is that these privileged, powerful, resourced people are often in positions of business decision-making or societal decision-making now more than ever. Just today I was reading about how one of these people, born to ridiculous amounts of wealth and influence, with privilege just on the basis of his name, was making dismissive, unempathic, cruel comments in a public forum about people living with certain health conditions. And yet, there are many, many, many people out there who continue to defend him as a good guy. And in almost every case, those defenders are people like him, or people who say, I know him. We sometimes do Thanksgiving together at his beach house. He doesn't really mean that. Yes, he does. That's why he said it. And because he has power, he'll get to institute policies that hurt people. Most of us don't have that. And because we're in the era that globally narcissistic people with tremendous amounts of power, resource, and privilege are making the rules, it has never been worse for regular people, and it's going to get a lot worse. Because whether you are in a relationship with one narcissistic person, or from a family with a few narcissistic people in it, or work in a workplace run by some narcissistic people, it will make you sick over time, always. And when you level that up, and all of the systems are being run by narcissistic people, everybody gets sick. Except the folks with the money, the power, and the status. Because they have their magical ways to make sure that they are taken care of. And they may be able to fake their empathy. So lots of people still believe that they have the people's best interest at heart. But I promise you, we ain't breathing the same air. And these folks with such power, status, influence, and privilege, they don't, they can't, and probably won't ever truly understand narcissism and what these behaviors do to the rest of us who don't have the kinds of protections that privilege and power give people. Ever. So how long can covert narcissism stay covert? I suppose it could stay covert forever, but that's as likely as finding a 10-carat diamond just lying on the beach or winning the Powerball. But the answer of how long covert narcissism can stay covert is actually a lot broader than you think. Despite all of the confusion in the use of terms like covert and vulnerable, and recognizing that there is some overlap between the two. For example, vulnerable narcissism is often comprised of more quiet traits that are uncomfortable and manipulative and sullen, but not as observable, not as shiny as charm and charisma. It does seem, though, that most survivors are in agreement that covert narcissism is the hidden narcissism, the stuff that other people don't spot as antagonistic, manipulative, angry, charming, charismatic, or attention-seeking. In fact, when most people look back on meeting a covert narcissistic person, they definitely don't recall lots of bells and whistles. Again, none of that charm, charisma, confidence. Sometimes they look back and they may remember someone who was earnest, helpful, funny, smart, or even shy and socially anxious, but definitely not charming and charismatic. For so long, and frankly until only relatively recently, our armchair conceptualization of narcissism or narcissist was of someone who was sort of a salesy, braggy, snobby, arrogant, selfish jerk. Movies, television shows have always had these sorts of caricatures of the a-hole narcissistic person who has the sports car and the trust fund, or the snobby country club lady, that kind of thing. That's what we thought it was, narcissism. Now, researchers and scholars and personality theorists and clinicians have dug into this more and learned that while there was a consistent core to narcissism, it wasn't just the jerk in a Corvette or on a yacht who screams, or somebody who screams at flight attendants or asks to see the manager. The problem with this caricature of narcissism is that it is stuck. It has stuck for a long time. And so people who were in relationships with narcissistic people who are more covert experienced a slower burn in these relationships. People in relationships with covert narcissists said, I would have been able to see the snobby, posturing, call the manager, arrogant person a mile away. But that's not what I met. Maybe I saw a few small red flags or pink flags early on, some grumpiness, sometimes some little put downs, being a know-it-all at times, not wanting to go out with other people, but nothing that screamed narcissist. The covert narcissistic person's low empathy, grandiosity and entitlement, attention-seeking, selfishness, and poor emotional regulation, all the core narcissistic stuff, come out in very different ways than we'd seen grandiose narcissism or overt narcissism. But the big question is, how long can covert narcissism stay covert? Again, I am going to say it's a tricky question. It's not like we can say, guaranteed that within 12 months, you will see the narcissism or your money back. All this narcissistic stuff, the criticism, the invalidation, the emotional and behavioral dysregulation, the manipulation, etc., is a combination of stuff. Some of it is unconscious defenses. Some of it is a step up from that, an attempt to stay in control in order to feel powerful, and then keep that icky insecurity and shame at bay. Some of it is trauma response and an attempt to stay safe by fight in the face of a threat. Some of it is the incapacity to self-reflect on how their behavior affects other people or even care that it affects other people. Some of it is in response to the shame which gets pulled forth when they feel a sense of rejection, abandonment, criticism, comparison, competition, or failure. What that means is that the hidden stuff that doesn't clock as narcissism initially starts popping out when frustration, shame, not feeling in control or a sense of power, a sense of threat, rejection, comparison, failure, when those things happen. Maybe they don't get the promotion. Maybe their boss is a jerk. Maybe they lose the job. Maybe you compare them in a conversation you're having with them to your ex. Maybe their best friend buys a really big house on the beach. Maybe you make a silly joke and they think you are making fun of them. Maybe your brother picks up the check at dinner and they personalize that as a dig that they don't have enough money. One day, something like that happens. And the response you will see from the covert narcissistic person may seem intense or disproportionate and overwhelming. And perhaps because up until then, your relationship with them wasn't characterized by betrayal or control or other dynamics you may see earlier in more overt, grandiose, or malignant relationships from the jump, that you wouldn't clock this as narcissism. But sadly, once that mask comes off, it stays off. What may happen is that you can't unsee it. And perhaps they kept it together for a long time in the early months of a relationship when things were going fine, or they were still building in something new. But it's as though once it happens, you can't put the angry genie back into the bottle. How long does this take to happen, for this proverbial unmasking to happen? Well, it could be as quick as a few weeks, and it could be as long as a few years. I know as a therapist, when we encounter very covert narcissistic clients, it can take a while for the pattern to emerge, even under the sort of the searing lens of therapy, right? Again, the covert and vulnerable styles are often quite overlapping. Even in therapy with these sort of covert, vulnerable clients, what comes into our office may be more sadness, anxiety, frustration, lots of grievances, being angry at other people, a sense of constant injustice, that they face more injustice than anyone in the world, a victimhood, that the world is unfair only to them. And the day the therapist pushes for accountability, or maybe pushes for taking other points of view or more emotionally vulnerable work, that them just complaining every session about how life isn't fair may not be helping, then the therapist starts to see it too. Because at that point, this client may become very contemptuous of the therapist, very angry at them. They may poke fun at the therapist's credentials. They may tell them, I knew it. I knew therapy was BS, just snake oil. You're a hack, that the therapist is not very good. Or, and what's most likely, is that they just stop coming to therapy. Sometimes that uncovering can take as long as 3 to 6 months. It usually happens within, I would say, usually by 4 months, we start getting it. Because the relationship didn't start with a flashy, shady, or even controlling narcissistic person, folks in the covert narcissistic relationships may feel that they had a good run for a while. So when the snappy, manipulative, aggrieved, disenfranchised, or passive-aggressive behavior shows up, the person may blame themselves. Oh, it's my fault. Like, everything was fine. I said something. I criticized them. Another question people have is, can it stay covert for years? Well, that's more rare. Maybe if this is someone you don't see that much, or maybe if they had a really good run of luck at the beginning of your relationship with them, and you also rarely made a single wrong move or said a wrong thing, for that to happen, a lot of stars need to line up. On average, the covert paint starts peeling in about 1 to 2 years in almost all cases. Sometimes sooner, rarely longer. But that's a real problem. In 1 to 2 years, you may be quite invested in a relationship. And if you don't understand these covert patterns and how different they are from the in-your-face, more malignant and grandiose patterns, then the self-blame, trauma-bonded cycle can start in earnest. And because in most people who have these more covert narcissistic patterns, we see the more vulnerable narcissistic patterns as well, your partner may vacillate between normal, regular days, passive-aggressive, victimized, sullen days, and days where you just feel sorry for them because it seems like nothing is working out for them. You may even be able to see it through the lenses of shame, trauma responses, insecurity, self-protection, and defenses. But by now, you are really exhausted from going between pity, anger, frustration, exhaustion, guilt, fear, and hope. That's a lot of pinballing around. The other problem is that the other people around you are not likely to be seeing what you are, the heavily angry, manipulative, pity and guilt and even shame-inducing stuff. It tends to happen behind closed doors. I mean, it's still narcissism after all. And even a vulnerable narcissist has some level of social perceptiveness. But this social perceptiveness is much lower in more vulnerable presentations. So people may notice that this person is surly, difficult to get along with, cold, and abrupt. The covert stuff is like a paint job that if you handle the stuff too much or too roughly, it gets dinged and you can't unding it. The same thing with narcissism. But you can't unsee it. And the empathy, and frankly the love you have for this person, the commitment you may have to the relationship, and the confusion that comes from this much time with it seeming like it's been a fine relationship. Not that show-offy, grandiose, narcissistic peacock stuff. All of that can make these covert patterns devastating and confusing as hell. And yeah, you might spy them in 1 to 2 years, but by then you're in pretty deep. So here's one I hear. Dr. Ramani, tell me why I just can't expose them to the world. Let's take that on. So that's the thing. People say, Doc, I just want to expose them. I'm going to start with I get it, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So you're watching this, you're in a narcissistic relationship, and they've done a number on you. Now the relationship ends, but the world continues to think that they're a cool person, a great guy, a cool gal, just fun and good. That was not your experience after betrayal and invalidation and emotional abuse and manipulation. And the one thing that makes your experience worse is that there is this entire group of folks around them that think they're great. So when you add in there what this relationship did to you and how it hurt you and how it affected you, and you see that, you want to expose them, right? You want the world to know the truth about them. You want to blast it wide and loud on social media. You want to share the text messages with the world, the recordings, the abusive rants, all of it. Let's start with the why of it, right? Because the confusion that comes out of narcissistic relationships is the capacity of the narcissistic person to wear multiple masks. A charming and charismatic mask in public, and then their abusive and manipulative and gaslighting mask in private. You've been devastated by the relationship, and the world just thinks it's a normal relationship breaking up because they think so well of this person. In fact, they may even look sideways at you. So you feel as though you've entered the twilight zone, and above all else, it feels unfair and unjust. Many survivors feel that they're not able to feel or get whole again after these relationships because the narcissistic person was able to come into their life, make a mess, still come out smelling like a rose to the world at large, and the person who was in the relationship feels that until the world knows who this person really is, who this narcissistic person really is, it won't feel right. All of this is so normal. Of course, We want the world to know what this person's like. And while this feeling may be most pronounced with narcissistic ex-partners, it may also be there for narcissistic bosses or co-workers or even family members. I mean, there's definitely some news stories out there floating out there now about people who are exposing some high-profile folks as narcissistic on the basis of their relationships with them. And I read this, it's actually quite fascinating, but also really heartbreaking to read. Because just as much as the commentary, the comments that the person who's posting this is attacking the person who posted it, rather than saying, whoa, this person's really narcissistic. So it's a risk. That could feel worse too. So what do you think you're supposed to do? There's no right answer to this. I'm not here to tell you in a directive way what to do. If you do decide to expose someone, a narcissistic person, you have to ask yourself if the risk is worth it to you. Listen, this kind of stuff can result in the threat of lawsuits, employment issues if this relates to a workplace narcissistic relationship. It can impact children if this is a narcissistic co-parent. Narcissistic people do not do well with any form of public exposure or any form of public reveal. So when it happens, if you were to do this, they will come out loud, fighting strong. Most often, because narcissistic people love frivolous lawsuits, they may approach you that way if they've got the money or the resources for that. And you have to consider what your budget is for legal fees and whatnot. If what you're alleging is true, it may still be okay legally, but it still may cost you a fair amount of money to attorneys to get there. Then there are your children. If children are involved, the internet is forever, and there's no really taking the stuff down. How would it affect them if they found out about it, this exposure, or they know about it? And then there are the employment issues. If what you are saying reflects prior bosses or colleagues, do you work in an industry where this could come back and bite you or put your career in harm's way? The narcissistic person has already done so much harm to you. I hate the thought that they could do more harm because yes, you wanted to expose them, but then it hurts you. Remember, the narcissistic person is likely to fire back themselves and attempt to paint you in a very negative light. It is likely to be made up stuff and it could be untrue, but they will say it. And it comes down to what your stomach is for that kind of a battle. For many people, a public exposure is simply not a viable option, that they're going to expose the narcissist in a more public forum. But you may be left with a smaller but more relatable issue of how am I supposed to tell the other people in my life who this person really is? What comes to mind to me is a story I'd heard of a woman, and her husband had cheated on her multiple times. She, from a place of shame and at the time wanting to protect her children who were still minors and just not wanting to put herself out there in that way, she didn't speak about it. The children grew up and they were themselves getting more and more clear that about their father's behavior being narcissistic. She didn't even say anything. He had yet one more affair and that was it for her. She had no more worries about custody and stuff, but she still didn't say anything. Then her friends started saying to her, what are you thinking with splitting? How bad could your marriage be? We're all a little bored in our marriages. What are you going to do now? Are you going to grow old alone? She slowly found the courage to speak her truth. She's not the one who cheated. He was. And after one too many dinner parties, when people kept looking at her sideways for blowing up a 40-year marriage, because that was the narrative, she said gently to one of them who had taken her aside, and she said in a very dignified manner, we're going to call her husband John, right? She said, yeah, I left because John was unfaithful 5 times in our marriage, and most recently, he was unfaithful with the woman who managed one of our rental properties, someone we treated like family. He even asked if she could meet us when we were on vacation and we're checking in on the property. This woman told her friend all of this very calmly. She didn't name names beyond that. She also knew that infidelity was a cardinal sin for this group of folks. Instead of talking about the stuff that really hurt her more over the years, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the invalidation, she stayed focused on the betrayal and on the affair. The friend said, I had no idea. John always sold us this story about how he was always wanting to go on adventures and do things with you and that you wouldn't want to join in. The woman, the one who left the marriage, didn't keep going with the conversation. She simply said, "That was my truth. I told you what he did. That's why I left." As you can imagine, word of all that went like wildfire through their friendship network. John heard about it, blew his stack, for a few months sent threatening emails to his ex-wife for bad-mouthing him to their friends, told her that he had every right to cheat in a sexless marriage with a washed-up old woman. She ignored the text messages, she ignored the emails, and when he tried to play fast and loose with some financial matters to stick it to her, she just swallowed the lawyer's fee and had it taken care of, just to avoid dealing with John. But she did expose John. And when I talked to her about it sometime later, she said, it felt lighter. I merely just talked about what he did rather than who he was, which is really a raging narcissistic sack of you-know-what. But when I stuck to the what he did of it all, the friend heard it. She was actually a little apologetic, and that was that. So what this woman found in essence was that the best form of exposure in her particular world was to tell her story with dignity and without blaming herself. It took her a long time to get there. I'm going to tell you now, I empathize deeply with the desire to have it be known what the narcissist did, to expose them. And as you go through your process of healing, you have to determine what this looks like for you. Who is going to be in the splash zone of your exposure and your revelations? How will that affect them? You have to figure out if you can roll with the financial punches or the time-consuming BS of dealing with their messages and lawyers' letters and all the rest of it. To this day, I got to tell you, I still see some narcissistic folks from my past still get lots of adulation and praise, and they walk around thinking they're all that and that they're righteous in their path. By my nature, I'm not an exposer because I'm kind of conflict avoidant. It's just not my way. But gosh, I really wish they would get exposed. But I figure that this is for other people who meet these narcissists from my past. They'll figure it out on their own. I got myself away from these folks. That's the only frame of reference that I have. But I have to tell you, the irony of this video is I just had the experience of seeing some praise one of these narcissistic folks from my past had just received. And it did not feel good. And there's only one other person, two other people actually out there I know who are aware of how rotten this person is. And I shared the post with her. One of the others is actually the one who shared it with me. And I felt sane. And the only justice I know is that I try to teach people about narcissistic abuse, so hopefully other people don't fall into these traps. But I want to reassert that the desire to expose the narcissistic person for what they did to you is a pretty universal experience. Whatever you do, do it, don't do it. Don't judge yourself harshly for whatever decision you make, but be circumspect. I don't want you to get hurt. They've already done enough harm to you. And remember the old adage about the pig in the mud? The pig really does like it. And healing always takes longer when you have to stop to wash off the mud. So you do it right for you, and let me tell you, anytime I see a story of a narcissistic person being exposed, it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure, or maybe even not that guilty. Thanks again.